Hi there. Thank you for that lovely introduction, and thank you all so much for being here today for the Key to Hope luncheon. It really means a lot to me. As you heard, I'm Esmy. I'm a reporter. I've been reporting for many years now, most of it spent here in the Pacific Northwest, which is really bizarre because I never thought I would be a journalist growing up. I actually studied environmental science, to be completely honest with you, but I've always cared about the stories of people, who they are, how they got there, why they are the way they are. And in 8 years of interviewing hundreds of people, I have seen a lot. I've profiled this guy. This is Brad Felger. He owns something like 40 Falcons. It's a long story, but ask me about it afterwards. I've covered immigration. I've covered wildfires, landslides, floods. I also try to write about nice things, not just heartbreak. So I try to highlight the beauty of rural communities where I'm from. And this right here is from a wedding in central Washington. 23 couples got together and tied the knot in a giant communal celebration. In 2020, I covered COVID, of course, Seattle being the first city in the US to be shut down during the pandemic. I then got a bulletproof vest and helmet. I reported on the frontline protests for racial justice. I wrote more obituaries than I expected during that time. Despite all of this, I still love journalism. I believe in the power of storytelling, and I believe that in listening to each other, especially the most vulnerable among us, we can learn something about how to be a kinder, wiser, more capable community. To be completely honest with you, it still amazes me that people let me into their home to just talk to them, to share. So I'm very, very grateful for that. Now, when I first started covering mental health for my beat at the Seattle Times in 2021, I was thrilled. I had worked in public radio for several years, but I wanted to try newspapers, and mental health, that was just such an interesting topic, right? Because you can't really picture it. Mental health, it's this intimate, personal thing, but we all have it, just like we have physical health, and yet it's hard to unravel an intangible thing. So when I got that job, I really wanted to figure out, how do I demystify this topic? How do I render it visible? How do I write about it like it's news? Because back then, and even now I'd argue, it's vital for our media to cover mental health. So here's what I did. I covered Oregon's Measure 109, that's learning about psilocybin, aka magic mushrooms, and their therapeutic potential. I wrote about seasonal affective disorder more times than I care to write about. And as a reminder, we should all be exercising more and getting ready for the big dark. I got to interview some brilliant doctors and lawyers, advocates, family members, experts, and government officials. I learned that Washington had built its first psychiatric hospital before this state was even formally a part of the US. Back then, it was called the Insane Asylum of the Washington Territory. I learned that in the past, not only did we try to perform lobotomies on patients, but we also tried hydrotherapy, occupational or work therapy, all sorts of things, in an attempt to heal people, to help them manage their symptoms. It wasn't until the early 1900s that doctors even discovered that what was then known as general paralysis of the insane was actually the late stages of untreated syphilis. At the time, fever therapy was used to cure patients. And later, with the invention of penicillin, they were able to help more people. Now, you might be thinking, okay, but this was all years and years and years ago. Where is this going, Esmy? Well, stay with me, because I would argue there's still a lot we don't know about mental and behavioral health. I think we really are just scratching the surface. Modern technology is helping, but really, so is breaking down silos and communicating among different parts of the mental health system. So, in some ways, we're just figuring out how to measure success, how to think through these interrelated systems, how to work with people, peers, and families, rather than having a strictly top-down prescriptive approach. One of the other things I noticed during my time reporting is that the more that I wrote about mental health, the more I inevitably started reporting on courts, jails, prisons, addiction, and homelessness. What I started seeing was this patchwork system that's not formally a part of the hospital and medical world, but it's still part of the mental health system now. And in covering that with my other colleagues at the Seattle Times and KUOW, we came up with a podcast, Lost Patients, because we wanted other people to see what we found. Now, I'm going to play the trailer for you so you can get a better sense of this, and I promise this is not just completely shameless self-promotion.
When you ask someone who has experienced psychosis what it's like to go through it and come out the other end, they often describe it as a dream state.
You know, you'll see things that are fantastical. Obviously, none of it is really happening, but when you're in a dream, you don't know that.
Sometimes it's a state of wonder.
It's euphoric in some way. I think I felt sort of euphoric at the same time I was feeling frightened.
Sometimes it's an experience of paranoia.
I would be looking at somebody and I'd see their face and I'd turn around and it wasn't that same person. It was like they had a different face.
There's a reason I track down people like this who know what psychosis feels like from the inside. It's because, like a lot of us living in big cities in the US, I see psychosis all the time. I'm Will James, and my city, Seattle, it can feel overwhelmed by it. Police responded to almost 10,000 of these calls last year. Shop owners, distraught family members, and bystanders seeking help for people who are often so deep in an inward spiral that they don't know they're sick. Folks who ricochet between emergency rooms, jails, and the streets. Over the last decade or so, I've watched Seattle become one of a handful of cities that are national symbols of a mental health crisis on our streets. Fairly or unfairly, many of us feel like something in our society has gone deeply, almost spiritually off course. In this podcast, Lost Patients, my colleagues from the Seattle Times and KUOW are going to ask a simple question. Why? Why is it this way? What decisions have we made or not made over the last 50 years that have brought us here? We'll seek answers in mental health courts, emergency rooms, and on the grounds of long-shuttered institutions. Episodes drop every Tuesday, starting March 12th.
So for this, we investigated the mental health system in our region, as you heard, but we also went back to the closure of Northern State Hospital in the 70s. We talked to some people whose family members were patients there, and then we talked to people who are directly impacted. One of those people we got to talk to, or one of those people we got to know, rather, in Lost Patients, is a man named Adam. I first learned about Adam through his family. I can tell you that he grew up in the South, then ended up in Portland, Oregon, when his family moved. He's about 40 years old, he's really into cars, and he likes fixing things. His mother, Heidi, and his sister, Bethany, told me he was exceptionally gifted with music. He actually taught himself how to play drums. He was the middle child. They describe him as the glue that kept their family together. Adam actually lived in Shoreline for a little while, and he also had severe mental illness. He was not formally diagnosed until later, and he started using drugs at one point, most likely to cope with the symptoms of his illness. He went through the jail and prison system in Washington and in Oregon. He had cases in Everett, Marysville, and other local jurisdictions. Adam spent time at Harborview and Swedish Hospital just up the road. And later, he ended up at Western State, the largest psychiatric hospital this side of the Mississippi. Adam, though, even when he went through all these different systems, as he churned through all these different environments, he struggled to maintain his housing. Throughout his journey, he bounced around living with his mom, an uncle, then eventually in an RV, and later, he was even living in the woods. When he showed up in emergency rooms, Adam often needed food, sleep, a quiet place where he was safe. I know this because I spent about 6 months tracking down his medical files from 3 different hospitals across 5 years. Altogether, that was about 400 pages piecing together his life. Now, during my time reporting on mental health, I learned that one of the most powerful tools for people with severe mental illness who were unhoused or just struggling, one of the best things for them was often just sleep. It allowed their bodies to rest, to heal, to have time to decompress from the stress of living on the streets, and allowed them to think and to problem solve better. When you think about it, the rest of us, we do that too. We just do it at home. usually with the help of our friends or families. And for the most part, we're not in a severe of a crisis, so it doesn't take as long for us to rest and bounce back. Housing, then, that's one of the keys, both for stabilizing someone during a psychiatric crisis, but really for the recovery. People with mental illness can and do go on to have full, rich lives. If you have any doubts about that, the National Institute of Mental Health estimates that 1 in 5 people in the US have a mental illness of some kind. That 1 in 5 means people here too, maybe at your table, people in your office, in our neighborhoods, maybe even in our own families. By a show of hands, how many of you know someone who struggled with housing, mental illness, or substance use? Same here. I can tell you it's impacted my family too. And while depression and anxiety are different from severe mental illnesses like bipolar disorder or schizophrenia, the reality is people like Adam can still recover, but they need an anchor. And we need to talk more about what that anchor can be. To me, that means a safe place to sleep, to store their belongings, a place to call home. And when it comes to the right kind of housing for some of the most vulnerable people in our community, sometimes that means building something different, something to meet their needs. I recently had the chance to tour Plymouth Crossing in Bellevue. It's a kind of permanent supportive housing. And as a reporter, I've toured other buildings like it too. And I want to tell you more about the very infrastructure of these buildings because it's fascinating, and I don't think a lot of people actually know about them. First of all, these homes are unique. Plymouth Crossing, for example, has 92 rooms for individuals that are equipped with stoves, with automatic timers. The bathrooms, too, have drains to avoid any potential flooding. This helps people who might be experiencing psychosis or other symptoms of their illness. So it keeps them and others safe. It keeps the building safe as well. The walls are actually thicker in some of these buildings, so residents don't impact each other. And in some other buildings, I've seen providers actually create essentially like a pharmacy downstairs so residents can easily access their medications. This is one way that nonprofit providers are meeting people where they're at. Plymouth estimates that about 80% of the people served in this kind of building are diagnosed with a mental illness or are in recovery. And I think this is the kind of innovation that it takes to really care for people. It is the kind of solution that allows people to live with dignity that helps them build themselves back up. Rather than just providing shelter, it's about building a space that supports people at a physical, medical, and community level. In our current mental health system, other places cannot meet that need, but they are often asked to fulfill that role. For example, I've interviewed police chiefs and jail staff, and they are among the first to say, we're not equipped to handle people in crisis. When people are sick and unmedicated or when they're detoxing, what they really need are medical staff. And while medical staff at hospitals can help stabilize people in crisis, often what's also needed is long-term basic things: food, a place to sleep, clothes, if possible, the ability to reconnect people to their families and friends. When I talk to nurses and doctors too, they are the first to say a hospital is not a home. Emergency rooms are loud and chaotic. It's not the kind of space that can help someone in crisis calm down. Sometimes it can even make their symptoms worse. And while staff do their best to help, hospitals are also aware of their limitations. They want to be able to send people home or to a safe place after they're discharged. Because if you think about it, otherwise, all that time, all the resources we invested are lost. As that person goes back out into the world without a safe place to recover, they're more likely to decompensate, meaning they get sicker. So it takes more time, more resources to stabilize them all over again. That's the churn, that's that cycle. For Adam, at one point, once he was discharged from Western State Hospital in 2023, he was actually dropped off at the Bread of Life mission. It's a homeless shelter in the Pioneer Square neighborhood here in Seattle. Staff have no evidence that he even spent the night there. His family tried getting him help, but they felt like their only real options were the emergency room or jail. Adam actually survived only 4 weeks before he died. In his case, a lot of things went wrong, from not getting care earlier From facing co-occurring disorders and other medical problems, he was incredibly vulnerable. But in many cases, or in many ways, what he needed was not exactly rocket science either. He needed a place to stabilize. He needed to heal. And while housing is expensive here in Seattle, Boston, across the US, and all the major cities, the reality is it's just as expensive to not house people. As you heard earlier, housing for 1 year at a Plymouth building, for example, costs the same as 16 days at a King County hospital or 10 weeks at the King County jail. That choice is a policy choice in many ways. As one researcher from the University of Pennsylvania put it when I interviewed here a few months ago, budgets are moral documents. She said, where a community chooses to invest, therein lies their values. And if you're thinking, well, geez, I thought, a journalist is not supposed to be an advocate, I would mostly agree with you, as would my editors. I do not advocate for specific parties or politicians, but it's not exactly a hot take that we need more housing in Seattle and the rest of the country. And there's no doubt that the current mental health system is not so much a system as it is a maze, a patchwork quilt, where if people are lucky, they manage to find the right help at the right time. But too many people don't, and it costs lives. So no, I may not be an advocate for specific policies, but I am a reporter who can spot what is working and what isn't. My very job is to go to people much smarter than I, to ask what could be better, what is needed for the atoms of the world, and why is it so hard to get there if most experts agree on the answer? I am an advocate for asking better questions of ourselves and elected leaders. I'm an advocate for healthy neighborhoods, healthy people. And vitally, I'm convinced that it is my duty, our duty, to try something, to believe in a better tomorrow and to invest in that again and again until we finally get there. I believe it really is our responsibility to build a kinder community. And we may disagree on how to get there, but often in my experience, most of us are on board. And you in this room, thank goodness, are part of that movement. You are here because you care, because you also sense that there is a path forward where something better is possible. We would not be here without your enduring optimism. Plymouth is charting that path, and while there are no silver bullets when it comes to intractable problems, there are definitely evidence-based solutions that do work. This reporter would like you to know they are written about in white papers and academic journals again and again, even if they don't show up in the headlines next Monday. Housing people who desperately need housing is one of those keys. Adam and countless others like him need it. So to me, the question now is, how can we, as individuals and as a community, break this cycle? How can we ensure that those who need support aren't left to navigate systems that fail to meet their needs? It's easy to wait for others to solve these problems, but real change starts with us, through understanding coupled with real action. The future of mental health care depends on the choices we make now. Thank you for joining me and turning that key today to unlock a better tomorrow.